Hey, my name's Jeremy. This is my YouTube channel for those of you who don't know me. Normally, I do hiking, adventure style vlogging, drone videos, that type of thing. So if you're into that and you're into maybe seeing drone videos of Canada, Nova Scotia, then maybe consider subscribing to my channel to see more. This video is going to be a little bit different because of the coronavirus. Obviously, I'm limited to where I can travel, fly my drone, hike, that type of thing. So this is actually going to be my first tutorial or tips video I'm going to do. And just a quick background on me. I know I've only been on YouTube for a year or so, just kind of casually, and then just of lately I've been kind of picking up speed. That said, I have actually been editing videos for the company I work for. These are kind of like online how-to videos. I'm not featured in them. I'm just behind the scenes filming and editing them. So I do have quite a bit of experience editing and having to edit quickly with sometimes a lot of kind of monologue talking, the talking heads type thing. So this video is for you if you're a vlogger or if you film videos that are interview style. These tips will help you kind of get a little quicker at your editing and help your workflow. So let's get into it. So the first thing that comes to mind that I don't think a lot of people do, especially if you're a YouTuber, you might not bother doing something like this, would be pre-editing. What I mean by pre-editing is basically everything you do in your editing suite, whether it's Premiere or Resolve, which I use on the PC behind me, and that would be like naming your clips, which is hugely useful if you have a massive pile of clips. Like after one of my shoots at work, I could easily have 15-20 different clips. That would be close-ups, wide shots, different intros, outros. Eventually you get a wide array of clips and you're trying to be efficient and accurate. So a good thing, an easy thing to do is to name your clips, just a simple description of what that clip is, and include the angle, whether it's a wide shot, a close-up, medium close-up, whatever you want, drone shot, panning, tilting, however you want to name it. It's just going to help you in the long run when you have a long edit ahead of you. Okay, so the first thing that I do when I start a new project, after I import all the files, I want to review each file individually, mark in and out points, and also separately mark any mistakes or dead air. That's going to make it more efficient when I drag the files from my bin over to the timeline. If I was to take all the files as is, drag them all into the timeline right now, you would see what? Like, you look at this, they're all the same color, they all have these weird GH011699 .mp4. Like, what does that even mean? That's just what the camera default, named them for you. It's not helpful, and if your timeline was like 4 or 5 times the length of this one, which mine are when I'm at work, and they get very lengthy, very quick. You have different types of angles, different types of shots, drone shots, hyperlapse, time-lapse, close-ups, wide angles, medium shots. Very quickly can be overwhelming on your timeline, and you may not know where to start. The cuts get confusing. So this way, I'm just going to undo this. This will help with your organization, and it will take a little bit of pre-editing time, but in the long run, and I know this from experience from 5 years of editing talking head, documentary, tutorial style videos, this will save you a lot of time in the long run. If you end up with 2 hours of raw footage that needs to be cut down to 45 minutes, that's a lot of work. If you don't have the organization, it's going to just get out of control. Trust me, I've been there so many times. So the first thing I do is I'm going to review each file individually. I'm not going to do that in this example. I'll just show you how I do it. At first, just open the file as is, and then I start pushing play. So right now it's just kind of like just me talking to my daughter. It's not exactly what I want in my vlog. So I've already watched this. I'm just going to get to the point where my vlog would actually start, where I actually hold the camera up in my face. I'm going to mark that as an endpoint because that's where this is actually going to start. So what happens here is everything on this timeline in the source window, this is the window in the top left corner on Premiere Pro, it says source up here. It's just not my actual timeline. So everything on the right of the playhead where I put the in mark is highlighted. So when I drag this clip from here over to my timeline, this stuff will not be on the timeline, almost as if I'd pre-cut this footage. So I'm gonna go through.
Hey, how's it going? Oh, here, there's cut.
So there was a mistake right away. So again, if I had drug this over to my timeline, I'd have to cut that out and then rearrange the clips, drag the handles around. So instead, I know I start actually talking here.
Hey, how's it going?
So this is where my clip is going to start.
Yep, just wait for a sec.
Oh, I had to start again. So for the third time, I actually had to change the endpoint, which is way more convenient to do than to change it as a cut on further on my timeline later on. It's just it's easy to find mistakes this way. It's easy to get your cuts a lot tighter. One thing I know, once I get up here, I actually have a marker from when I actually edited this vlog. I made a mistake here.
Adventure I took in November to
so I kind of forgot what I was going to say. I lost my words. What I do is I push the M key on my keyboard. It puts up this. I'm going to delete the marker just to show you. If I push M, pops up a marker. So I know when I drag this footage over to the timeline, I can glance at it and I will see this marker and I'll know, oh yeah, I have to cut this out, because you can't cut things out of the source window. You can only mark things. And another thing I do along with marking is I will actually just change the color of the marker if there's a long spot of dead air where nothing's going on, like if something gets interrupted or I have to change the setup but I actually don't stop recording and there's like several minutes of just dead air. I will actually mark, say like I use a light blue marker for the start of that interruption and then another light blue marker for the end of that interruption, whereas my other markers are the default that Premiere has, which I think is like a brown or red or something like that, which I just use to mark like kind of mess ups, cursing, or anything I don't want to have included in the final edit. The next thing I'm going to do is at the end of the footage I do a whip pan, and I know that I don't want my footage to go after the whip pan because that's part of the transition effect between this clip and the next one. So I whip, and before I stop recording I push O for the out point. So when I drag this footage to the timeline, this is the point that it's going to stop in the timeline, not where the recording actually finished. So back over to my bin. Since now I know this is my first clip in my vlog, I'm going to name it as such as intro. I'm going to say that it's wide, so I know it's a wide shot. And the last thing that I do is, if you note on the edge here in the bin, these little squares, they denote the color for each clip. And when you drag them over to the timeline, as I showed at the very first of this, right now they're all the same color and it can be very confusing. So what I do is I right click or control click, I scroll down here to label. That brings up a bunch of colors. There's presets. Mine looks a little bit different than yours might, because I've gone ahead and I've changed presets for specific angles, like medium close-up, medium, wide. You might have like, drone or hyperlapse down here. You can change the colors to angles or whatever you want if it makes it easier for you. So for me, I changed magenta to wide, so I'm going to pick wide. And you'll notice up here the square to the left of where it shows wide is now changed to magenta. So I know when I drag, if I was to take all of them, again, drag them onto my timeline, now we can see that it shows intro. It doesn't say that GH0 blah 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 stuff from the GoPro. And it's no longer this blue color, it is the magenta that I picked. So I know every time I see magenta on my timeline that it is actually a wide shot, or anything I want that to correspond to. This is one thing that you might not consider, and you can do this in your editing suite, you can do this on YouTube, you can do this in your your video playing software, maybe not all of them, but this sounds kind of silly at first, but when you're actually previewing your footage, listening for mistakes, dead air, things that you're going to need to cut out, like for instance in the pre-editing stage, or when you want to review your final edit to make sure there isn't any mistakes or cuts that don't really go well and you want to come back and fix later, is actually listening and watching your footage and fast forward. So what a lot of people don't realize is that you can you can preview your footage sped up. You can actually preview it sped up so fast that you can't actually even make it out. And so if I was to go to my next clip, which would have been, so it's the other side of my whip pan. So I wouldn't want to mark my in point until I started that motion. So I push in. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to listen to this clip in fast forward. That way it's 4 minutes long, and if I want to listen just for mistakes and dead air, I only have to listen to this for 2 minutes instead of 4. So I push the L key.
Okay, so
that starts playing like normal. I push L again. It starts listening in fast forward.
Just get out of the house and hopefully get rid of some shack wackiness. Okay,
so there's dead air there. I push the marker button, you get the marker to come up so I know when I cut it.
And without having been here this summer, I would not know where to go. But
more dead air, mark it. If you want to listen even faster, push L again. And I know that my out point's going to be here, so my out point's going to be right in the snow, because it's going to be the in-camera transition to the next scene. So I'm going to push O, because if I kept going, I pick it back up, and the end of my shot would actually be not what I want, which is facing my daughter in the forest. So I'm going to delete my timeline again so you can see when I come back. Rename this to shot 2 wide. I'm going to change the label color to wide. And then I'm going to drag all these on the timeline again. This is just for illustration. I normally wouldn't keep deleting my timeline and repopulating it, but this is just for illustration. Keep existing settings. So now I know these 2 shots are my wide shots, and I know right here, I'll zoom in. So right here, we know that there's dead air. So I have the marker here, and in the next clip I have the mistakes that I've also marked, so I can quickly cut those spots out without thinking about it. And if I want to watch in fast forward on my timeline, I can do that as well. Start playing, push L. So trust me, watching your footage in fast forward as fast as you can actually be able to make out what's being said so you don't miss anything is key when you have tons of footage and a lot of talking head boring stuff. You've already filmed it once, you don't want to hear it again, so fast forward. So after you have your footage pre-edited, another major thing, and there's going to be lots of tutorials, advice on this on YouTube, so I'm not going to kind of get into the specifics of it. Just basically a suggestion for you to look up somebody who's already covered this, but keyboard shortcuts are absolutely your friend. If you have a ton of editing work to do, a keyboard shortcut, I couldn't imagine doing my job without using keyboard shortcuts, and that's like your in Premiere there's extraction, lift, there's cutting to the playhead, there's the slide tool, there's all kinds of different things that normally you would have to do the absolute painful long way, along with the keyboard shortcuts, and I'll go through a couple examples, is having a default for transitions, and that's in Adobe Premiere. I think the default is Control or Command D, and that will automatically put in, like if you use a lot of cross dissolves, which in the videos I do for the business I work at, I do a lot of cross dissolve, so this will automatically put in a 15 frame cross dissolve. That default you can change depending on if you're shooting in 30 frames per second or 24 or 60 or whatever you want. You know, you could have 15 or 12 or 24 or 30 frame cross dissolve by default, you know, depending on what suits your needs. which is a massive help. Okay, so last thing I wanted to talk about was keyboard shortcuts. If you're going to be an effective and efficient editor, keyboard shortcuts are an absolute must. I'm just going to go over some of my favorites for Adobe Premiere. There's tons of videos on YouTube in regards to keyboard shortcuts. And not just keyboard shortcuts, it's tools that Adobe or Blackmagic or whoever it is, Apple, have already invented to make your life easier for editing. So instead of you just kind of dragging the handles on different video clips around, you know, going like this and then boxing everything and pulling it over, instead of doing stuff the absolute long way, there's always a better way to do things. So one of the tools I like to use in Premiere anyway is the ripple trim, and I have it mapped to the W and Q keys. So basically how that's going to work, if I have the playhead moved over this clip, and I know I want to make a cut here, normally I would take the razor tool, make a cut on the playhead, highlight the chunk that I don't want, delete it, highlight everything, pull it over, so then that piece of the clip I didn't want would be gone. The best way to do that is with the pre-built ripple trim tool that's in Premiere. So how that works is, depending on which one you use, everything from the right, which is the first example I'm going to give, all the way to the next cut. So everything from the playhead, the long vertical bar, this way to the next cut will be automatically removed. This chunk will be pulled back to where the playhead is. So if I push the W key, boom, that whole chunk's gone. If I wanted to do in the opposite direction, move the playhead, say here, and I wanted to start where I wanted the clip to actually start where I start talking and cut back, I'll zoom in, cut back in this direction to the last cut, the last clip. I move the playhead where I want the cut to start, the extraction, I guess, to start, and I push the Q key, and it's going to do a ripple trim in the left. Boom. It's going to pull all that stuff in. So that is one of my favorite tools and keyboard shortcuts. So the last topic I want to talk about is using the pre-built tools. Basically the authors of the software you're going to use, whether it's Premiere or Blackmagic, or if it's Final Cut, they already have tools built to take care of most of the common operations you're going to do while you're editing on your timeline. So for instance, if you want to just cut out a chunk of your timeline, say from here at the end of this clip to the very end, instead of doing things the long way, taking a razor tool, making a cut, highlighting that chunk you want out of there, deleting it, zooming out, highlighting the clips on the right side of the gap, dragging them over. Instead, there's a tool that takes care of all that. In Premiere, it's the ripple trim. I have a keyboard shortcut set up to Q and W, depending on if I'm going to go to the right of the playhead or the left of the playhead. There's a different shortcut, but it's the same idea. So if I wanted to cut everything from here to the end of this clip, then I would just put the playhead where I want the cut to start, and if I'm cutting to the right, I push W, and it's going to automatically cut that chunk out to the next cut and pull everything back like a magnet. It's pretty cool. I'm going to undo that and show you if you want to do the same effect, the ripple trim from left of the playhead to the previous cut. Then do the same thing. You move the playhead where you want the cut to start, push Q, and it will automatically delete everything back to the previous cut, pull everything to the right over to meet it at that point. So the next tool I want to use, say you have a cut lined up on your timeline over a soundtrack. Just going to pull some music in to make an example. Let's zoom in. So this next tool, the example I'm going to use is you have your cut lined up, say stay on this peak right here on the audio. You have your cut lined up, but when you go to review the footage, it's not what you want to be in the footage. So instead of dragging this all around, stretching and pulling on the handles, instead of doing that and rearranging it all, the easiest thing to do, if you just want to move what we're seeing at this point in the clip, basically you're going to move the in and the out points on it. And the way to do that is with the slip tool. I have it mapped to the S key as my shortcut. Most of these shortcuts, because I began with Final Cut Pro, I remapped over to Adobe Premiere when I made the jump to Adobe. So push S. It brings up the tool that looks like two parallel lines with a double arrow in the middle. If you click on it and drag, up in the top in the program sequence, you can see as I move it, it'll actually move where the in and the out point is until you get it where you want it. It'll actually leave the physical cut in the exact same spot. So that's good if you want to keep nudging this over until you get the scene exactly where you want it to be. The next tool I want to talk about is a slide tool. So see where we have this chunk sticking out. So what I want to do is, I like this whole clip. I don't want to sacrifice anything from this last clip at the very end, but I want it to line up with the edge of the soundtrack. And I don't mind sacrificing some of this stuff. Say this is some B-roll on this clip and it's just there to kind of fill in time. If I wanted to push this over and then just shrink the in and the out point and how much of this clip is actually displayed, I would push the slide tool, which in my case is D. It's kind of two parallel lines with arrows on the outsides. You grab this clip and simply push it over. And then now this clip is still the exact same length. It's lined up with the edge of my soundtrack, and it has consequently shrunk the next one over, which I knew was going to happen, and I was ready for that. And it's actually useful all the time. The last one I want to talk about is the rolling edit tool. If you look at these peaks right here, say this is a hi-hat or a drum, and you had meant for your cut to be directly over that noise, but when you were listening to the soundtrack, you were a little off, and your cut ended up a little off, and you want to move everything over without having to make a big box, pull stuff around, and do it the long way. If you use the rolling edit tool, which is on my keyboard shortcut in R, it's just this one single line with two arrows on the edges. If you click right in your cut line between the two clips, you can simply drag that over top of the peak, zoom in if you have to. That basically shifts the in and the out points on these two clips that are joined, and allows you to slide where you want that actual cut to be and kind of reposition it. It's very useful. There's actually one more quick thing I wanted to show you, and I use it all the time. In those cases where I'm going to just remove everything here, I'm going to re-drag all these clips back to my timeline. So the first where I mentioned dead air, and I guess I don't see any dead air marked on here anymore, but if there's a spot you know you want to cut out and it's in the middle of your track, like say I want to cut out everything
Oh, it's a bigger water.
where I'm just talking to my daughter and it has nothing to do with my vlog, so from here to here where I actually address the camera again, I want to cut all that out. So instead of taking the razor tool, making a cut there, making a cut there, highlighting it, deleting it, zooming out, box selecting, pulling this together, instead of doing all of that, there's a much easier way to do it. And I love this. You push I like you're making an in point. It's going to highlight everything to the right. You move your playhead right before I start talking at the very last section of where I'd want to cut out. I push O. It's going to leave the section I'm going to cut out highlighted on my timeline, and then I'm going to simply push the extract tool, which in my case is the apostrophe. I push that, and it's going to delete everything that was highlighted, and it's going to grab everything to the right and pull it over to the clip on the left. There's actually one more. I keep having one more I forget about. There's the track select forward tool, which is also extremely useful. So let's say we do this the old-fashioned way. We make a cut, we delete, you zoom out, and normally you would want to box select all this stuff, drag it over. The easiest way to do that, especially if your timeline gets massive, is to use the track select forward tool in Premiere. There's a similar one in DaVinci Resolve. I'm not going to get into that right now, but anyway, it's I have it mapped to Alt F. It makes these two parallel arrows, one on top of the other. If you click on the first clip, it'll highlight automatically all the subsequent clips until the end of your timeline, and then you just drag it all back. Instead of you having to tediously box select everything, this is going to do it for you. It saves a ton of time. There's also the same and opposite of that. There's the track select reverse that just does the same thing, but to the left, and selects everything from the first clip that you click on all the way to the first of your timeline, and allows you to pull all that. It's the same thing. Anyway, that's going to do it for the tools section. Strongly recommend these practices. They will help you speed up your editing. They will help you become a more efficient editor. But that's it. Hopefully you enjoyed this. If it was helpful to you and it was something you can use, then please consider leaving a nice comment, some feedback, and if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I will see you guys in the next one.